Jessica, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let me ask you, so what was it that made you want to research about the parenting styles across cultures?
It was living in different cultures and experiencing cultural differences both as just a person, but then as a parent, I really noticed that the way people parent in different countries was different, and that people were very dogmatic about their beliefs, and it made me sort of question. It made me question also my own way of parenting as an American. So, um, yeah, I think just living in different countries, and I'm married to a Dane, and so being exposed to the Danish culture, being exposed to the Nordic culture. I lived in Italy. I was exposed to the Italian culture. I'm a lot in England. So I think just cross-culturally, um, it started to become very clear to me that there was a lot of differences, and I found that quite fascinating. And yeah, that's where sort of the whole journey began.
Right. So, well, you mentioned that your husband is Danish. Now, of course, I'm living in Finland, and something that I'm discovering is that just like Denmark, Finland has also been ranked among the happiest countries in the world. And so one of the questions that I initially had was, is happiness in children something that we teach, or is it something that emerges from the culture they grow up in?
I think it is something that I mean, obviously, where you grow up does make a difference. I can't deny that. However, when I wrote The Danish Way of Parenting, I wrote it because I wasn't living in Denmark at the time.
Hmm.
So I was actually using the principles, the Nordic principles, basically, and I was applying them in another culture. And I was having a lot of, I felt the results that you would get living in the culture. So I think that the happiness, you don't teach happiness per se, but I do think the way you approach parenting, particularly with younger kids when you have such a big influence, I think it does dramatically affect their happiness, well-being, sense of contentment as an adult.
Hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, well, now that I'm living in Finland, I can't help to think sort of, I do a lot of contrasting in terms of, as I mentioned to you previously when we started, I'm Mexican. So part of my life, I grew up in Mexico. So I guess from my years, from until I was like 10 years old, I grew up in Mexico. So I grew up in a very specific, let's say, poor area where there wasn't a lot of resources. And then once we moved to the US, so things changed. And the same, I suppose the parenting strategy that was given towards me when I was in the US, it was also a little bit different. And it was also influenced by a lot of different factors. So now living in Finland, I also see a lot of, well, some of them are sort of contradictory ideas, but at the end of the day, I think most cultures, in essence, want the best thing for their children. And one of the questions that I'm always asking myself is, okay, so how can I find the right balance from gathering all these ideas from different cultures into one that would fit the benefit of the kid? What has been some of the things that you have found that you have taken from all those cultures that you have encountered that you have applied towards your kids before we start diving into the six principles of the
Mhm.
book?
What are some of, you mean, what have I learned from some of the other cultures?
Yeah.
Well, particularly I would say Italy has given me a profound appreciation for food. The Italians are extremely focused on food. And yeah, in fact, I remember one of the differences I was really noticing, like pediatricians in Italy are I mean, the food they recommend you start giving your child, the first food is was very funny for me as an American. It was like, you had to make homemade brodo, which is like a vegetable broth with fresh vegetables, and then you put in little pasta and then parmesan and then olive oil. And I had moms that couldn't even come and meet me because they had to spend their morning making the fresh vegetable broth for the food. And this was, but it's I definitely, I mean, the Mediterranean diet, the like, so I think it's given me, we're coming from the fast food culture, a real appreciation for food. So that was a beautiful thing from the Italian culture. Um, yeah, I'd have to think about some of the other ones. That's the positive thing that stands out.
What about from your American culture? I mean, I think, you know, now being on this side of the world, sometimes you kind of tend to hear or see, sadly, sometimes negative things about America in terms of fast food or in terms of other things. Uh, of course, I really try to take in from my own experience what are all the positive things that I was able to learn while I was living in the U.S. and I try to focus on those. What are some of the things, of course, you as an American, that you still highlight in your parenting style?
Oh gosh, well, there's so many things I've tried to change, but if there's something that I think I really appreciate now, also because now I'm living in Denmark, and having lived in different places and experienced different things, probably what I really appreciate is, um, I do think that America, we are brought up with this idea of hard work, and that you can do anything if you put your mind to it. So I think, I feel like maybe I've also been able to accomplish a lot because I do have I do what I want. When I really want something, I'm very determined and I believe in it and I work hard, and I think that's something really positive that I got from my American culture. And maybe I'm, the challenge with that is that a lot of Americans, we end up feeling like we're not enough because we're constantly striving.
Hmm.
And so maybe that's the bad side of this. But which is where I feel like actually the Danish culture has helped balance me out a lot and give me, maybe the most positive side of that, where like hard work is definitely good, but I've also been able to understand like the benefit of just being
Hmm.
and not basing your self-worth on your accomplishments.
Yeah, that is completely true. And that's something that I've noticed in general, like of Nordic culture, just like you mentioned, the whole hard work thing, I was also able to learn in the US, whether it was playing sports for high school. And well, the part I lived, the time I lived in the US, I lived in Texas. So, like football is like a religion.
Hmm.
And there's like, I mean, for me, there was just the perfect place for me to nurture that hard work mentality. But then, like you mentioned, there's this hard work mentality thing that eventually can sort of lead you into creating your identity around the thing that you do or the thing that you do for work. Whereas here is not really about those things. It's really like about who you are as a human being and how you behave with other people and how you treat your children. So it sort of seems like different countries sort of have different extremes with certain disciplines. Like you mentioned here, in the Nordics, it sort of seems like your work it's something that comes secondary as a source, as a tool for you to provide to your family, whereas your well-being is the most important thing. And that is why there's like a lot of things that are put into motion that allow this kind of this society to thrive. Now, from something that you mentioned in your book is that Denmark has been for some years the happiest country in the world, and if not, it's usually in the top 5 countries in the world that is the happiest country. What do you think are some of the conditions that place Danish society in that particular place? Just for the listeners to kind of get an understanding as to what are the components that allow this to happen.
I mean, arguably, people will say there's a lot of different factors. I'm always saying that I believe it's very tied to parenting, and
Hmm.
that's partly because, as I said to you, I didn't. A lot of people will point to the social system and whatnot, and since I was never benefiting from that, when I was
Hmm.
in the Danish parenting and writing about it, um, I found that by accident, really. I had, after seeing all these different parenting practices, I had preferred my husband's way, my husband's family, and the kind of the Danish way, which I could see that was like a thing in Denmark. And I began, instead of looking to the books or looking to my own culture, I began only referring to the sort of Danish approach,
Hmm.
using that in my own life and my own parenting and my own, philosophy of living, really. And I really felt like a better person, like a better parent. And it wasn't until several years into this that I even discovered that Denmark was voted as the happiest country. I had no idea. So it was really, it was the day that I read in the newspaper. I remember this day vividly. We were on vacation. That morning, I had heard my husband speaking to our daughter in a way that I felt was very Danish. And he was kind of reframing her perspective around her fear of spiders.
Mm.
And he was helping her get really curious about it and really seeing how fascinating they were. And I was thinking that morning, I was thinking, wow, this is so cool that we have this influence, this kind of Danish reframing. And I felt so lucky to have this Danish influence in general in our life. And it was the same day that I read in the newspaper that Denmark had been voted as the happiest country in the world. And I thought, wow, why don't I know that? I'm American. We're obsessed with happiness. And and I had this light bulb go off in my head because I thought happy kids grow up to be happy adults who raise happy children, and it's a cycle that repeats itself. And I was quite sure that the Danish approach was very different, and I knew that it had changed my life. So I was very convinced that if it could make me a happier person and parent, it could help anybody. And so, yeah, my belief is that I think that the importance and you know, parenting is one of the hardest jobs in the world, for sure. It's the only job we don't get any training for. It's the job that will turn everybody on their head and they don't know how it's coming for them. Like before you compare it is also a huge opportunity, I think, to grow as a person, to become a better person, to focus on something other than yourself. And so, yeah, so I think that the part of the reason why Danes are consistently voted as the happiest country in the world, they're always in the top three for 40 years in a row. I believe it has a large part to do with the way they treat children, because then they grow up to be happier people. And it repeats
Mm.
itself because we tend to just repeat what we learn unless you really, really change. So
Yeah.
I feel like it's like a legacy that gets passed on.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the kids sort of continue to reenact the things that they can see from us, right, as parents. So it's like a never-ending cycle. That's good. So in your book, in the Danish Way of Parenting, you outline 6 key principles that define how, well, Danish parents raise happy, resilient children. I would like to go through, each and every one of those if we're able to get enough time in here. So they stand for parent. And the first one, it's play. So it's sort of the foundations of resilience and creativity. Can you tell me a little bit more as to how in Denmark they prioritize free play, where it is different from other parts of the world that you have seen, and how it's beneficial to the kids?
Yes, so I'll just preface this a little bit. So, I mean, the all of the six principles that are in the book is really, I always say it's a bit more like a philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that anybody can benefit. I don't think it's just for parents. I think it's something that can benefit people in the workplace, can benefit people, because it's really, I think it's a perspective on the Danish perspective on life.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so something like play is just you have it in Finland as well. There's just a huge focus on play being seen as the most important thing that a child can engage in. So that's free play. It's not, organized activities that an adult leads, that an adult controls. And there's a lot of talk about this now. It's really funny. I mean, I wrote this book quite a few years ago now, and it's become so popular now, like free play, like we've discovered it, right? And yet since 1871 in Denmark, it's been considered an educational theory. So it's like the most important thing a child can do. And all the research shows that there's tons of benefits to a child's self-esteem. They learn empathy, they learn negotiation skills, resilience. It gives them a sense of agency over their life. It makes them feel more secure. It reduces anxiety, and on and on and on. So, yeah, the basic idea is just basically to stop over programming your child's life and feeling like you have to educate them. That was my American way. I was like from early on, planning their college education at, when my daughter was 1. And it's more like, let them be a child, let them have their childhood. They will be more successful and happier later in life if you allow them to be a child when they're younger.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I've come to learn as well here. The whole concept of allowing kids to be kids and giving them the opportunity to be kids. And at the same time, sort of that's like a good place for us parents to identify what are the things that they're going to be passionate about. And if we pay close attention, then it's a place where we can start nurturing those abilities if that is something that they want to develop. And I think it's just, well, for me as a parent, it has been a huge learning experience, sort of figuring out or learning what is sort of the back engineering of those things that are put in place in these kinds of societies. For example, the play thing, and all those things that you mentioned. That as somebody who grew up in Mexico, for example, we just knew play as play. We thought it was just something that it would be just to sort of kill time, while the parents are doing something. But there's so much behind all those things, all those little social skills that one as a kid is developing in that play session. And well, things are different now. Obviously, back when I was growing up, it was a lot harder for parents to keep kids in the house and to keep them outside. Whereas now, sort of things are changing a little bit, especially in the U.S. It sort of seems that everybody's inside playing video games on the phone, doing all these things. Whereas, before kids were just free to roam outside, explore with their friends, play with insects, sticks, rocks, whatever it may be. And I do see certain benefits of obviously having that creativity of being outside and playing outside. Now, what are some simple ways that parents can encourage, for example, more free play?
I think first and foremost, I think you have to just believe in it.
Hmm.
And that is something that I know for a lot of parents, particularly American parents, maybe British parents, and a lot of parents in different cultures. It's very difficult to get out of the competition with other parents who say that their kids are enrolled in, 6 different courses and studying Chinese and doing baseball and, you know, uh, studying Spanish block building classes. And it's very difficult to just believe that your child is actually getting more benefit from playing with other kids, finding other parents that want to do the same so that you can relax. I mean, the other thing that we forget is that what kids want most of all is to just spend nice time with their parents and not be stressed and not be pushed into doing activities. Because unfortunately, I think what happens in a lot of places is that the child unwittingly becomes a, an, a a sign of success for the parent.
Mm.
So it becomes another kind of accomplishment. It becomes another badge of, it's like wearing a branded purse or something. It's like my child, we have in America, you have bumper stickers to show where your child is going to school. If they're my child is a straight A student at Pineview Academy. And, and, and so I think sometimes we don't even realize you get caught up into this competition of showing how successful, smart, advanced your child is, and this is stressful for a kid. And since all kids want to do is please you, they'll do it. right? But it's often at their own expense. And what do I mean by that? I mean, for example, if you think if you push a child to read early, right? All children, for the most part, unless there's really some challenges, will learn to read at a certain point. I think it's like age 9,
Hmm.
but they learn at different rates. Some kids will learn much earlier, some kids will take more time. But the kids that are forced to read, pushed to read earlier, are far more anxious and are more exhibit more signs of anxiety than the child that's allowed to learn to read when they're ready. And so again, it's just like, they call it the hurried child syndrome. It's very much talked about now because we have such an anxiety epidemic. So yeah, so all of these things are good to be aware of. And by the way, I would just caveat, we demonizing video games these days and screen time and stuff so much. It's kind of so extreme. And I know we'll talk about it at some point, but like I'm working on a project called Raising Digital Citizens, and it's very much based on the Danish approach, which is really not, I mean, I want parents to know that you don't have to totally demonize all screen time because in Denmark, they also recognize play. They call it fluid play, being on a screen as well. So there's just a few more guidelines to that. So like it's it's good that if the play is social. So for example, if they're playing video games, that they are playing with others. Some games are also physical. So like you have like this games where you can
Yeah,
do dance or
it's
something.
like
So
very
like
interactive.
interactive, physical, creative. So what I want to say is like, because I feel like we've gotten so black and white right now with this discussion that it's either or, and I don't think it's either or. I think it's both and. So I just want parents to also know that like play can also be screenplay, and there's difference between quality and quantity. And
Hmm.
so it's kind of like also integrating and just making sure there's balance.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, you were touching base on, for example, like you were giving some examples that some kids are being pushed to read at a very early age. And with staying on the same point on the playing part, now, obviously, as parents, once the kid gets to a certain age, he's gonna go to kindergarten, he's gonna go to school. So, if we think, for example, obviously, we gotta make some contrast. If we think, for example, of the American educational system, does that kind of place parents in a much more difficult position to allow this playing to actually take place? I mean, given that if I remember going to school in the US, of course, in some places there is help available for kids that are maybe struggling with a few things. So there's like those special ed classes for kids that that are a bit challenged with those things. But how much of that sort of puts us against the wall, or not against the wall, or puts us parents in a difficult position when we are trying to, let's say, do the Finnish way of parenting, but yet at the same time sort of fighting against the American style of education.
I think it is challenging, and I think that's why I'm saying I think it actually requires finding a group, making a community. I mean, I was in an American school, my kids were in American school, and we really like had to find other friends that believed in free play. So on the weekends,
Hmm.
rather than having them enrolled in a million activities, we got together and let them play in nature, let them play on the beach, let them play, and just be be creative together and try not to get caught up in the competition. And then also school, again, there's a lot more awareness of this now. There's a lot more talk of it now. I
Hmm.
think that there is some education reform. Um, many schools had completely stripped away free play in replacement of more academics and more learning. And we just know there's so much research out on this now that we just know that this is not good for a lot of kids, and particularly boys don't learn, again, it's generalization, but a lot of boys don't learn as well in these kinds of environments, and they need more movement, they need more play, and they need more activity. Um, so I mean, yeah, I think awareness is going to be hugely helpful also just to keep the conversation going. And I mean, the thing is also in the US, there are actually a lot of options. If parents look, there are a lot of options for schools if they're interested in maybe something a little bit different than the standard. Um, but I think it's good to be aware
Yeah,
and to have a community.
yeah. And I think you mentioned something very important there. I mean, I think a lot of things really come down to the parents, how much the parent is involved in the kid's life to really wanting them to grow up as resilient and with a good well-being. Uh, you talk a little bit about on the second point, it's authenticity, raising emotional aware kids. So, in the Danish parenting emphasizes a lot of honesty and emotional openness, even when discussions can be tough or even when there is difficult topics to talk about. Now, in many cultures, parents sort of try to protect their kids from different things that could be seen as harmful for the kids because they may not be ready for whatever reason it may be. Why is it important to be as real as possible and as honest as possible with kids?
I think the for some reason we've made a lot of topics taboo.
Hmm.
It's in other cultures, as you know, I mean, it was the same in American culture, and I got a bit of a shock with the Danish culture. But then I've done a lot of research on it, and basically, it's like in an age appropriate way, kids can handle everything, you know? And I think the Danish approach is very much like if it's part of life, it should be part of an education. So kids will have lots of questions about life. And the idea is not to shy away from it. It doesn't mean you have to have all the answers, but it also doesn't mean you have to pretend that life is a fairy tale. And the irony of this is that so many of the fairy tales that Disney has made, like The Little Mermaid, are originally Danish fairy tales
Hmm.
because Hans Christian Andersen, he's the most famous, probably fairy tale writer in the world. And most of his fairy tales do not have a happy ending. The Little Mermaid in the original Danish version, she dies of sadness and turns into sea foam. She doesn't get the prince and live happily ever after. That's the American version.
Yeah.
And I think it's like, I think for a Danish person, their perspective is kind of like, why would we hide life in all of its complexity to a child? Uh, and what you find is that very often this is more about the adult's discomfort than the child's, because kids are actually really they can handle it. Again, in an age appropriate way. And I think what you will find if you dare to be more like honest and maybe read books that are dealing with different topics or um, discuss what they may encounter in life, not just the happy stuff. Um, I think it makes your relationship far more rich. And it also sets your child up to be more resilient because
Hmm.
life is not a fairy tale. So when the
Yeah.
prince doesn't come, they don't get a shock, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And in your book, you talk a little bit about reframing with this particular point. How can parents sort of reframe things to help kids navigate emotions in an authentic way without overwhelming them?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that Danes are very, very good at, and they get this in their education, and this is what my husband was doing with our daughter the day that I got the idea to write the book. It it's like it can become a habit the way that we choose to interpret situations. So we know from research that the way you choose to describe something, the way you see a situation and the details you focus on have a direct effect on your brain and they have a direct effect on your emotions. So every situation always has some positive details. I don't mean I don't mean a silver like the American exaggerated rose-colored glasses, everything is awesome all the time. Um, but just like there's always a way to look at something that is more constructive. And I find Danes are incredibly gifted at this. And that's coming back to this like parenting style. And, I think parents are very good at helping kids focus on what they can do rather than what they can't do. Focusing on the wonder of spiders rather than the scary, terrible, you know, it's more about like we lead them to see the wonder. We lead them to see them more, to be more curious, to be more open, to focus on what they can do, what they can't do. And what this does it also it creates a stronger relationship. Again, coming back to the raising digital citizens, to the technology, which I'm working on a lot right now. What's interesting here is that we tend to like see technology as all bad and dangerous and awful and fearful because fear sells, and so everybody's afraid right now. And I think what's really, really important to realize is that the thing that's going to protect your kids the most is going to be our relationship with them, how much they trust us, how much they trust what we say. And you build that by having a relationship together. And one of the things I think the opportunities that we're missing right now, a lot for a lot of parents of many ages of kids, is also meeting them with what's positive about their digital life. So reframing saying no all the time to saying no, KNOW, right? Being interested, being curious. Um, what are you playing? Being more positive so that we can create a relationship with them, an authentic relationship, so that they also trust us. They don't see us as just the negative, oh, it's all bad. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that which I think can ultimately be more dangerous for our kids later because they won't feel that they can come to us.
Yeah. Yeah, especially with, I mean, the concept of technology and like screen time and all those things, you know, I think it also, I mean, kids are very smart in reality and they observe everything. And I think it comes down as well as what are like how we are behaving as parents inside the house with those particular topics. For example, I mean, if the kid has a tablet and you are sort of expecting that the kid has a good relationship with the tablet or with the TV, but then as soon as you get home as a parent, you turn on the TV and you're just watching TV the rest of the day, or you're on your phone doom scrolling. So I think building those relationships also has to do with us as parents becoming aware of our own personal use of technology and being mindful of how we use technology. And
Yeah.
that's something that yeah,
No, I was
that's
going to say,
something that yeah,
sorry.
that's something that I mean, we have two kids. We have a little four, well, she's going to be 5 soon. And we have a little one. He's going to be 2 this summer. And we have talked about these things, my wife and I. It's okay, we hear those conversations from other parents that, hey, I can't get my kid on the tablet. Every time we go on a trip, the only way that the trip can be made is if I give him a tablet. So we thought, okay, we're not condemning. Because I mean, I think we are judged to a certain extent, but maybe you don't condemn people's actions on or the choices that they are doing. But like something that we have talked about is okay, what kind of environment do we want at home? So we have kind of come to this sort of unspoken agreements that okay, whenever we have lunch, whenever we have dinner, whatever it may be, whenever it's family time at the table, you know, nobody has a phone. It's just us having dinner, having lunch, talking to each other about whatever it may be. If the kids want to talk about something, ask or talk about those things. And we have really noticed that even though she has a tablet, very rarely will she ask for it. And the games that we have in there, sort of things that she has sort of we have given her options. Like she'll ask, "What is this game about?" And what this is a game about. You learning words in a different language. I mean, of course, because we have a multilingual household. Those are like some of the things that she's interested in. So she's usually picking things that somehow we do see a benefit of it, like learning how do you say ball in Spanish, how do you say dog in Spanish, or in other in the languages that she hears us speak. So I think having good balance is sort of understanding what are the things that they are playing with, how they are using them, and understanding how they could be beneficial to them. And we've never really had a problem, putting the tablet away. Eventually, after I think her level of focus with the tablet, it's somewhere around 30 to 45 minutes, and then she'll just put it away, and then she'll start playing with her toys. So it's also, even though we see that she's maybe learning a new language, we also let her decide or sort of choose, okay, I'm done with this. I had a lot of fun. I'm moving on to the next thing, you know? So, but
Yeah, I
again, I
think you
think
said
it has to do a lot. Yeah.
no, I think you said something important here. We were talking about authenticity before this, the A and parent, and then reframing. And I think one of the key things is, and one of the sometimes hardest thing for parents to do is to realize that our kids are going to do what we do, not what we say. And so it is so important that we look at our own habits and we really look at what we're doing and really be aware of like what we're communicating with our actions, because authenticity is like it's about being honest with who we are and the example we're setting. And and then the reframing, like you're saying, um your daughter, she has some positive things that she likes, but then she gets off of it. But you guys have some nice habits where you're off the screen and you're not having it at the table. And I think all of these things that parents are also willing to follow through on is what helps set an example in the family. And it's and
Yeah, I
it's
couldn't.
hard. It's hard for a lot of parents.
Yeah, it is. Especially, if you're in the hustle and bustle, I can understand maybe a parent getting home, the first thing that they're doing is open up their laptop and continue to work. So then, we do try to pay as much attention as possible whenever those things. I mean, if, for example, my wife has a lot of work or I have a lot of work, then eventually we sort of like move on to the bedroom and continue to work. But then there's somebody there that is giving full attention to the kids whenever they're needing it and whenever they're requesting it. Because I think that's also very important as well. And well, and like you said, it really comes down to sort of coming up with agreements and opening up the communication with your wife or with your husband as, okay, how do we want to have this a dynamic as healthy as possible for the kids so that they can also grow and see that, okay, we have all these things, we have all these external distractions, but we are the proven example that you are the one that is in control, right? They don't become a distraction unless you allow it to become a distraction, right? So a lot of times it's sort of like, okay, how can I resist temptation? Well, why not start avoiding it? If you avoid it, then you don't have to resist it. That's kind of like some of the ways that we look at it. And well, and of course, it's always a learning process. We continue to learn every single day, and every single questions that our kids are asking us, it's always sort of thinking, okay, forget everything you know about your past, about your culture, and how you want to answer the question to the kid in the best possible way, because they're not seeing it the way that you're seeing it. They're seeing it from a curious place, right? So I mean, things like, I mean, our daughter has asked us, so where's grandma? Where is she now? I mean, she has passed away. So how do you explain death to a kid, right? Without scaring them in a very natural way. So sort of having those conversations in a healthy way as well sort of like helps the kids also to have expectations about the world. So well, that's sort of the reframing, and I think part of that reframing also, you talk a lot in your book about the internal versus the external locus of control, and that's something that I was fascinated about. Could you talk a little bit more about the internal versus external locus of control?
So locus is place, means place. So internal locus of control is the place of control. So when you have an internal locus of control, you believe that you control the you control the outcome of your life. It's kind of like free will versus existentialism.
Yeah.
Um, so an external locus of control is when you believe that you believe in fate, you believe you don't have control over your life, you believe that things happen for a reason, or um, and they found that people that have an external locus of control, so they believe in fate, they don't believe they control the things that happen to them, or they don't believe they have any, yeah, free will basically. They're more anxious and suffer from more depression. People that have an external locus of control. And when you believe that you can actually affect the outcome of things in your life, when you believe that you can sort of chart your course a little bit, um, this tends to have a more positive effect on, anxiety levels and the idea of more free play. Believe it or not, something as simple as giving your child more free play helps foster this internal locus of control because they choose what they want to play. They are able to have some agency over their life. They don't feel like an adult controls everything in their life. They don't feel like everything they do is because of a grade or a trophy or praise. When you allow children to be who they are without the expectation of who you want them to be, you allow them to learn to figure out their own path, and this kind of fosters that internal locus of control. It's just another simple example. They did studies on like people in nursing homes. When you're allowed to have some agency over your life, when you're allowed to choose, when you're allowed to decide things, right? It has a positive effect on your well-being, on your sense of self. So like just giving kids more trust, trusting in them to trust in themselves, letting them climb that tree, letting them challenge themselves without going, stop, don't do that, be afraid. Like the Danish approach to that would be saying, when every time you do that, you're putting your own worries. It's more about the parent than it is about the child
Yeah.
because they know how much fear they can control. It's not to say that they won't fall. It's not to say that they won't skin their knees, but kids don't want to get hurt, you know? So unless it's like there's a difference between like a risk and a hazard. Like if something's risky, a child will know how much risk they can handle. It's like I remember my son running one day and I wanted to say, "Stop running." And my husband was like, "He's a little boy. He's gonna run." And I was like, "Oh, Danish." And you really see it in Denmark, like how much danger they allow versus like in the US, or my God, in Italy, it's like all you hear is like, no, basta, non fare così. That's all you hear, parents screaming, don't do it. And and I think it's really interesting because also, funnily enough, Denmark, they have like some of the highest levels of innovation. And I also believe it's because weirdly, kids are so allowed to explore, and this all fosters that kind of sense of like, hmm, curiosity, and I can do this, and yeah.
Yeah. I think that kind of falls into the next, section, the empathy part. So, well, in Denmark, obviously, empathy is actively taught in schools. Why do you see empathy such a core part of raising well-adjusted kids?
Well, they know empathy is like hugely tied to well-being. Um, it improves your meaningful relationships. It works on the same neural pathways as forgiveness. So the more empathy you have, the more able you are able to forgive others, and we know that forgiveness is also tied to more well-being. Our meaningful relationships, the longest Harvard study ever conducted on happiness, has shown that the number one factor in happiness is our meaningful relationships, well above money, success, everything. Um, so the more you are learn empathy, and that's the other thing that I didn't know, that you actually need, you can learn it. Um, it's not like empathy 101, but it's more like a practice. It's more like, they teach it in many, many different ways, but also in like how we parent, we can foster it. And yeah, it's also been one of those things, I think, as an American, which has changed me a lot. Because, America is such a competitive culture. So that doesn't always go hand in hand with empathy. So yeah, I think you can. I think the big difference is, like, you can still be very competitive, but it's usually really not one person that's winning. It's usually a team.
Yeah, that's what I was going to refer to next. I mean, some parents may worry that being too empathetic can make the children less competitive. So let's say, I mean, what if, I mean, obviously, just like in Denmark, in all other countries, there's competitive sports, there's competitive markets. So what would be that? How can you strike that right balance between empathy and drive, for example?
I think the biggest difference, because actually I find Danes extremely competitive,
Yeah.
but the big difference is that there's a focus on the team winning, and there's a focus on we rather than I.
Hmm.
And I mean, you really see the difference in this, like also on TV and stuff. Like, America, you always have in every movie, there's a hero, one guy that saved the whole planet, right?
Yeah.
There's always one guy, there's always one, and it's usually a guy. Um, and I think, yeah, it's been, it's like there's no I in team.
Yeah.
Right? And another one of my favorite uh, quotes that I think really sums it up is when you change I to we, even illness becomes wellness.
Mm.
And I think that they have a much healthier approach in terms of saying, yeah, you know, sure, there's probably like a good player, but like everybody contributes to the winning, right?
Yeah.
And so everybody's seen. And so parents, for example, are encouraged to make sure you compliment other players, not just your own child. There's a lot of focus on making sure that the team plays together outside of the competition, so that they foster, they call it fellescape, which means they foster this sense of community. They foster this sense of friendship, of fellowship, so that it's not just we get on the field and we're competing. It's like it's very much we support each other.
Mm. I suppose
So
there it's also yeah. I suppose there it's also like a matter of reframing as well. Like, how do you frame the victory in one country versus another one? Whereas one, you're trying to see, well, who can be the hero, who can be the most valuable player. Whereas maybe on this side of the world, it's more like, okay, how can we win as a team? How can we win as a society? How can we win as a school? Yeah, that's always very interesting, and that's some of the things that, yeah,
no, and I think it's important to point out. I think because it's such a cultural difference.
yeah,
Um, so in many, but particularly the American culture, many cultures, so because we have, it's almost like when you get hung up on this idea that it's like one person, why does that not work? Because like if you're a manager, if you're in a friendship and
hmm,
whatever, like it's so important that you recognize other people
yeah,
and that you work well together in a team. I mean, they know like the best managers are the ones that know how to work well with others and that have empathy and that don't step on other people. Like it's hugely important. So, but I think when you're raised and you parent in the way that's like, yeah, you've got to be the best. It's only you. It's only you. It it doesn't foster that looking out for other people. And I think that's also one of the big differences. And I've even seen it in my kids when we moved to Denmark. There's so much more focus here on remember to take care of other people. And I think it's really, really nice. And it's something that I think we overlook a little bit in the American culture.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. That is true. Yeah, those are some of the questions that I'm starting to sort of make myself, as my kids are starting to get older and whatever path they choose is okay, what kind of parent do I want to be? Do I want to be that pushy parent that, pushes their kids? Because that's sort of like what you see sometimes, outside or especially, me that I grew up in the US. But it's kind of funny, like, I had this conversation with one of my football coaches. His two sons happened to become very successful. They both played D1 football. Both went pro. So I was very curious. I said, so I asked him, how do you instill the hard work and ethic uh, in your kids? And surprisingly, he told me, a lot of people think that the kids got to what they got because of how much I pushed. He said, but in reality, no. He says, like, I just exemplified everything that I thought would be good for them at home. He said, for example, my kids, since they were 8 years old, they wanted to play every night football in the living room. We played every night in the living room. So whenever they, at a certain age, they said, Dad, I would like to play at college level. It was like, okay, well, then we can get you the tools necessary, but it's always going to be up to you how far you want to go. I'm not going to push you. You're going to do it yourself.
Okay,
So,
okay. So hold on, I'm going to stop you there because
yeah,
we talked about the internal locus of control.
yeah,
So that's a perfect example of where I love that you gave this example because this is a perfect example where he balanced it just the right. Because if you push too much, then the kid loses the drive, and they're doing it
yeah,
for the wrong reason, right? If you don't, if you have just that right balance, then it comes from them. It comes from that internal locus of control, and it means so much more.
yeah,
It's like the kid that's forced to play the piano and they're like, oh my God. And my parents like, you play, right? But then if you back off and you allow it to also come from the child when they want to play, it means so much more because it comes from them.
yeah, yeah. And to me, it was like a huge, like a wake up moment. Because I mean, I spent time with those guys at school, and and well, they would work as hard just as anybody else. And but he also mentioned, once again, it comes down what you do at home. While everybody else is out there partying, what are you doing? Are you taking care of your body? Are you taking care of your health? Are you taking care of your nutrition? So it's like all those things. And he said, like, I would always ask my kids, what do you want to do? And I would give them examples. Okay, you want to go be a kid? That's fine. Go be a kid. Now, if you want to do something special, you got to think, is that something you want to do, or do you want to move into this direction? And he talks about, he says, well, because the reality is that for a lot of people, they're going to play sports, competitive sports for what, 3, 4 years if they're lucky. But his end goal was always what kind of human being they're going to be, what kind of father they're going to be, what kind of husband they're going to be, because those are the things that they're going to be for the rest of their lives. So a lot of the hard work ethics that he was able to instill in them was with that end goal. It's okay, if those things don't pan out, if their dreams don't pan out, they already have a solid foundation of how to treat their wife, how to treat their kids, how to treat other people, how to help other people. And, you know, I think those are a lot of things that maybe we don't see as parents whenever we're trying to help our kids to become something. We sort of lose focus as to what is the main objective in life. Once again, what are you going to be as a person, not what are you going to be as a professional.
Yeah, and I think another thing is to remember is that this idea of helping each other and this idea of like, you know, um, you may be the best football player, but maybe you're terrible at math. and some other things where you need help. So, it's also this idea of kind of empathy is it's like, help others because you're going to need help too.
Yeah.
We need each other. I mean, that's the thing is that we're not alone on a desert island. We are a social being, and we did survive because we could collaborate, not because we were having fangs and claws and tearing each other apart. So, being able to take care of others, work with others, doesn't mean you won't still be a winner. You'll just be
Mhm.
happier. You'll be a happier
Yeah.
winner.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this kind of brings us to the next point about, no ultimatums. And this is one that I'm having to learn probably on a daily basis about the concept of discipline across culture. So, in many cultures, discipline is sort of seen as being kind of a figure of authority or from an authority standpoint, because let's say the famous "you do it because I said so." But in Danish parenting, sort of avoids ultimatums and instead of focuses on sort of mutual agreements and mutual respect. Why does this approach work better?
Well, I was coming from the same background you were, so I also came from a very authoritarian background, and I was obsessed with how we were going to discipline our kids. And my husband was like, "Why are you so obsessed with discipline?" He's like, "We'll figure it out. Like, we'll manage the problems." And so it was then, I mean, after many discussions, I discovered that spanking was illegal in Denmark, and it has been illegal for way more than 20 years. And the thought of like, using physical anything is just considered totally outrageous. Um, and that was kind of normal in my house, and I didn't really question it that much. So yeah, so it just, I mean, it was good we had these conversations, before we even really had kids and or got into, um, because it started to make me see a very different way and a very different approach and something I had not really considered so much. Because again, you will repeat what your parents did if you don't think about it. That's just
Yeah.
obvious because it's the only experience we will ever have. Unless you work in childcare, and you've had some other training, like why would we know any different? So, so of course, it's also a big struggle for me because I came from this authoritarian background, but it's also why I felt so strongly about talking about it because I also think that I am convinced it's better for kids, and I think it's better for us as people because no parent feels good about yelling at their kids or God spanking their kids or whatever. Like, I don't know any parent that's like, yeah, that's feel great about that. Um, and so, one of the things compared to it's like, because many people who come from these environments or grew up this way, they say, yeah, I was spanked or I was yelled at and I'm fine.
Yeah.
So what's the problem? Well, it's like the same as saying, yeah, I smoked my whole life and I didn't get lung cancer. That doesn't mean it's good for people.
Yeah.
And we just know there's so much research now that shows that this sort of, you know, rougher authoritarian style parenting, it's not as good for kids long term. You're going to struggle more in the teen years. Either kids become very obedient and they suppress their feelings and can suffer from depression, or they become total rebels like I did. And um, you know, there's a nice middle ground. And I think what I saw in Denmark also, what really struck me was the relationship with teenagers here was so much more respectful.
Mhm.
And that really stood out to me because I had such a troubled teen period with my parents. I was like, what's going on here? Um, I believe it's because when you treat kids with respect from early on, and I don't mean permissive parenting, people will mess this up. This doesn't this doesn't mean not giving any boundaries. This doesn't mean not having any standing on anything. It's not a pendulum swing. It's having clear boundaries. It's having, you know, authority, but there's a difference between authoritarian and authoritative.
Mhm.
And um, and what I think you'll find is that if you manage to get this balance right and you have respect-based parenting, not fear-based, respect-based, then it will come back to you in a positive way in the teen years.
Yeah. How can parents shift from power struggles to a more cooperative approach?
It's not easy, but I think it's first, yeah, it's awareness first and foremost. It's awareness of what I call them default settings. So it's what you're like programmed to do. Like I said, I knew what I was programmed to do because of how I was raised. So you have to kind of like really look at that and make a decision that you want to change it and have some strategies. I'm actually coming out with a new book next month, FYI, where I'm applying this philosophy to practical everyday approaches. So it's called the Danish Way Every Day. So it's like giving parents practical ways to apply this approach. Um, and yeah, and this can be like being more aware of what you want to communicate. Something as simple also as like your words and your tone. Um, so one of the things I was getting wrong, for example, was like because I was trying to be so respectful, I was not sounding super sure what I was saying. Because I was like, why do they listen to you and not to me? And he's like, when I say it's time to go to bed, I'm saying it, I know what I'm saying. It's time to go to bed. You're like, you don't, I didn't sound sure at all. It's like, don't you think it's time to go to bed?
Mm.
And again, sounds simple, but it's not that Danish parenting is like permissive. It's very clear there's boundaries. It's also including yourself. I need to do other things tonight. We've agreed that you go to bed at this hour. It's communicating with authority, right? And it's
Yeah.
have boundaries, but it's not making your kids afraid of you and making it, and this is important for Americans, it's not an I win, you lose. This is a cultural default setting that many of us have because we come from this I win culture, and this spills over without realizing it into parenting. Without realizing it, suddenly it's like, I'm the adult, I'm supposed to be the one. I'm supposed to
Hmm.
be I'm the winner here. And this really screws us up a lot of times. If you get rid of that approach that I'm the adult and I have to win, you know, already you can start at a more respectful stance.
Yeah. And I think I've been thinking a lot about that because I also come from an authoritarian, I guess, discipline style from Mexico and also the US. So now that I think about it, I think a lot of those instructions also come from an egocentric point of, or place. Whereas if I'm telling you to do something and then if the child says no and then we get upset and then we yell, we're not yelling because the task is not being accomplished. We're yelling because we feel that our ego is being attacked by somebody not complying to the instructions that we are giving. And I think maybe sort of understanding that or where is that anger comes from that the kid is not doing something that we asked them to do. Like, is it really because they're not wanting to do the task or because they told us no and we don't like to be told no? So I think a lot of it is just understanding ourselves as well. It's like, okay, why am I being upset? Am I being upset because it's challenging whatever ideas I have about myself or who I am? Or is it just because he doesn't simply just understand what is the thing that he's supposed to do? At least for myself, of course, I've had to, work at it as well and think maybe, okay, maybe the instruction that I gave wasn't clear. Maybe I need to try a different form. And a lot of times, or at least what we're finding is those things is okay, maybe we didn't ask the right way or we didn't say it in the right way for the kid to really understand, why the thing that we're asking is good for him. And that also comes once again, they do what we do. So if we tell them, hey, eat your vegetables, and then we're eating something different, it's like, well, how can you ask that whenever you're eating something different? Of course, they're not going to want to. Yeah, that's a very interesting one.
Yeah, and
What a,
I
yeah.
think also last thing I'll say about that is I think it's also like it's also about checking in with yourself about how much surplus you have.
Yeah.
So, for example, like I think sometimes we have to really go like, am I in the right mindset for this
Mm.
scenario, right? Because sometimes we're not, and or we're tired, or we're because when you're really stressed or tired, that's when you're most likely to return to your default settings. And so as much as and kids sniff that out, they know if you're trying to be fake or you're trying, you know what I mean? So like I think it's also about being in touch with yourself and also sometimes just being honest about that with your kid. That's being more authentic. It's like, you know what? I'm really tired right now and I don't think I'm going to react the way I want to. So let's just, actually in this case, like, here's a toy, play with this while I get this done. Or here's, you know, or ask your partner to help
Yeah. Yeah. I
because
think,
sometimes we're not able to respond the way we want to. And that's okay. I think that's also being human.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's maybe well, that's the one that we use here. I mean, if for whatever reason, I come home with negative numbers, and something comes up, I'll ask my wife, hey, just help me out here, until I regulate.
Totally.
Yeah, and once again, it's all about us paying attention to ourselves because, well, they're gonna see those things, and and yeah, like just being fully present and thinking, what it is that you want for your kids and keeping that in mind. And I know it's very hard for parents and even for ourselves. There's so much things going on, your career, bills, whatever it may be, that then you sort of forget about the really important things. And if we can just keep those things in mind, I think it just makes it a lot easier for us. What about the togetherness? Is it pronounced Hygge or
Hygge.
Hygge? Hygge.
Hygge. Mhm.
Yeah, Hygge. So I've actually heard about this concept before because well, we do have some Finnish some Danish friends, and they have tried to explain to us this concept about Danish families prioritizing hygge. So it's sort of the sense of warmth and togetherness. And how does this concept help kids feel secure and connected?
Because it's basically like it's having cozy times with your family where you're very like present. You're not complaining, you're not thinking about your work stress, you're not bragging, you're not talking about politics, you're not in your mind, you're not in your work thing. You're just there, you're present, you're thinking about the person you're with or the people you're with, and you're in the moment rather than I think it's very much about we rather than I. And it sounds very easy to do, but it's really not if you're not Danish. So it takes effort. And so like we've made this Hygge oath, which you can find in the book, and I also talk about it in this next book a lot. Um, and I think one of the reasons why it's so good is because I kind of think of it as like an oasis. So, and this goes on and on as you get older. And remember, like, you're not Danish. You have to actively make hygge happen for your family, but like your kids will grow up to do it naturally. That's the beautiful thing about the way you parent, right? Is that it can get passed on. But it's kind of like an oasis where it's a place where you don't have to be something. You don't have to prove
Mm.
anything. You're loved for who you are. And I remember when I used to hang out with my Danish family, and which I'd get there and I'd be like, why does no, in my American family, the first thing they ask is like, what are you doing? What's happening with work? Or what are you doing? What are you doing? Right. And you've got to like have something to present. And I couldn't understand why with the Danish family, like nobody was asking this and nobody was talking about this. And so you could be having some great success and nobody's talking about it. But you could also be having some terrible crisis and nobody's talking about it. And what I realize is that for these periods of time, there's a place that you can go to, which is like an oasis where you can just be together and you're just loved for who you are in that moment,
Mm.
which is actually throughout your life. I mean, there's all kinds of other times to complain and brag and talk about politics and whatever, all things that are kind of divisive and put you a little bit like this.
Mhm.
Uh, But this idea of creating like time where you can just be and enjoy the moment and be in the present moment and not talk about controversial, divisive, stressful things becomes really nice for families.
Mm,
And we've adopted this in my American family, and it has totally transformed our family. Like I
mm.
cannot even tell you how much nicer my American family is now because we have Hygge in it. It's
Wow.
it's it's dramatic.
Wow. I wonder if the Norwegians have something similar. I think now with these things that you just said, I've come to the realization that for Finns, sauna is their hygge.
Yeah,
Because
probably.
yeah, yeah, probably. I mean that same description. I mean, I asked once a Finn, like, so what's the thing about sauna? What is so important? And he gave me the same description that you did. He said, well, that's the place. That's our sacred place. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk about problems. We go there to be. So I was
Hot.
like, okay,
Hot.
hot. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Wow, that's interesting.
So just
So
imagine who you can make anywhere without the sauna.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, now that I think about it, I think if each culture was to develop or have their own sort of hygge or sauna, whatever it may be, I think we would all be in a much better place, right?
I mean, honestly, it's like I said, it's on one hand, it's a very simple concept. On the other hand, it's actually very difficult because it requires everybody to want to make it happen. That's the challenge is you have to kind of talk about it and like decide, okay, this is the time we're gonna like create hygge. And the more you do it, the more natural it happens. You know,
Yeah,
you understand, oh, okay, like we have the candles lit at the dinner table. This is gonna be a hygge time, or you know, it becomes more natural. But so it's a little sometimes it can be a bit challenging to get started doing it for some people. But wow, it's so powerful. And I have to say, so coming back to this technology thing, it's true that Hygge is essentially technology free. So like you were saying at your family dinners, it's like no technology. And so I really highly encourage this thing of like creating media free Hygge spaces. However, it does not mean that you cannot also have Hygge with a screen.
mm,
So that means like I think a lot of kids think that, oh God, to be on my screen, I have to go in and shut my door. You know, like I mean, as they get older, right? I don't know about
yeah,
five, but you know, it can also be hygge. It can also be cozy to be together. I call it digital hygge. Um, so that kids don't because you can still talk. Oh, what are you playing? Oh, who I just got this. You know what I mean? It's like you know, or to share something at the table that you experienced online or whatever. Like, I try to make sure families know that they don't demonize too much the digital world because it is part of our kids' world. It is where they're growing up. So as much as first and foremost, you need to have Hygge free play in the real world, you can also have it in the digital world.
yeah. Tell me a little bit more about that program, about the digital citizenship. What is the system that you have put in place that sort of allows that smooth and harmonious transition with technology and kids?
Well, I mean, it was very much based on the Danish way of parenting, and I'm talking about it a lot in this next book as well. I think as I got my kids got older, I just realized that before I gave them full digital freedom,
Hmm.
I knew that it's kind of like, you know, you become a parent, it's the hardest job in the world. And suddenly I'm like, I'm becoming this digital parent, and I felt like I was handing keys to a car, which was like the digital freedom, which was a phone, but like, you know, it can be any kind of more digital freedom, and it just felt like I have not given her any training into how to be in this world. And I knew that in Denmark, they had a really good digital citizenship program in the schools. They talk a lot about empathy. They talk a lot about, you know, critical thinking, consent, bullying, all these things that they're talking about how to be a good person in the real world. They're also talking about how you do it in the digital world. And so I really wanted to prepare my daughter before I gave her the keys to that car And so I created these, I'll show you, I have them here.
The
Raising Digital
cards.
Citizens conversation cards. Yes, I made these so that I told my daughter, I said, look, let's do these cards together. So we talk about all of these things. Like we open a conversation, we open a dialogue, and then once we complete these, you can get a phone. And she was like, yes, she was so happy. Well, because and any parent that gets an older child will know that there's like this phase where they really, really, really want access to this world. It's more belonging with their friends, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, again, coming back to this Danish idea of reframing no, which is our tendency to say no, it's all bad, into know and getting curious, KNOW, and learning about their digital world. Um, for me, the relationship I have with my kids now, with technology and the trust we've built, rather than fear, and the open door we have with digital Hygge, and I find the balance that we've created is something that is really missing right now in the discussion. And I think a lot of parents feel shame and they feel horrible if their kids are even near a screen because fear sells.
Hmm.
Fear goes viral, right? But guess what? Our kids are going to be, their jobs in the future are going to be dealing with digital things. And like if you look at kids in the hunter-gatherer societies, they played with the tools of tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
That's how they learn to get ready for the tools of tomorrow. And I think whether we like it or not, with AI and so many things, unless your child is going to go be a forester, and even then I challenge that they would still be dealing with technology. I think that parents have to also like get clever together with their kids and and be open to learning and maybe also I think this is what's the hardest thing is to realize that we also have to invest time in creating a relationship with them in this digital world. And that's going to require us getting a little bit more educated, which is what I tried to do with these cards is to help parents come in humble because our kids know more than we do. Like when they get to this
Yeah.
age, they just do, right? And that's fine. Like we can totally learn from them. And I had one little boy I interviewed the other day who did the cards with his parents, and he was so happy because he thought his mom came to him with a box of rules because she was so negative about technology. He couldn't believe she was actually coming to talk to him in a positive way. Um, but he said, maybe if an adult would take a card and ask the question and ask the child and ask me, teach me. So he was like, because the kids have so much to say, but we're not listening to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this comes back to that no ultimatums approach and that respect-based parenting. If we would just take the time to also listen and hear that they have a lot to tell us as well, that's creating trust. And then if something bad happens to them, which it probably will at some point in this digital world, they can come to us rather than hide.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think connecting all the dots from all the chapters of your book, I think maybe I've been thinking about like what's the approach of the book. Of course, there's a lot of things that are helpful for the kids, but in reality as well, the way that I've kind of come to the conclusion is that I think if we are able to apply all these things to ourselves as if our parents were doing these things to us, in essence, would be given to the kids because, you know, like being showing empathy is gonna come from the parents. How can you teach a kid to be empathetic if we're not empathetic with other people? And that comes from having those conversations at the table. You know, are you talking bad about other people? Or are you talking good about other people? How you talk to other people whenever they're not there. So once again, some of the conversations that I have is everything about like, okay, what are the things that you are doing whenever your kids are watching? Because then, yeah, you can try to teach empathy, but then you're sort of, talking smack about your neighbor or about your friend, then it sort of gives the kid, conflicting ideas.
This was a big change for me. This was some unawareness also that I had learning about the Danish way and like how I communicated with my kids and particularly my daughter, I remember. And in this next book, when I talk about the practical ways to show empathy or to teach empathy, it's actually literally coming from the Danish health authorities who give parents directives or like not directives, but guidelines, help, things to be aware of how you talk to your kids after school. And so it's like, it's just what you're saying. It's like, make sure you talk kindly about the teachers. Try to help them see the other side if they've had an argument with someone.
Yeah.
Um, all these, it was funny because it was one of those things where when I would drive home with my daughter and she would have had an issue with a friend, my American way might have been like, oh, wow, she sounds mean, you know, these, but having this Danish way in my head, I was like, oh, okay, so, getting curious. Why do you think do you think maybe she was tired or, hungry? You know how it is when you're tired sometimes. Like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, it's helping lead them to a more positive conclusion. It's helping them put themselves in other people's shoes. And what they say, I love this term they use in Danish, which is they call the parent the invisible classmate because basically when your child goes to school, you're also with them because everything you do in the home, everything you say comes with them and affects the class.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
put responsibility on us in the home. Remember, you're the invisible classmate, so you're helping your child in the class.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I think if parents can understand that concept that the kid is not going to school, it's also the kid and you and your husband are going to school. So they're a reflection of who we are and what we are and what we do and what we say. Jessica, tell me a little bit about this new book that's coming up. What are the key points or the questions that you're trying to answer?
Well, I mean, so I just have a lot of parents that have asked, like, I really like the Danish way of parenting, but I'd like a little more practical application for it. So like doing chores or yeah, like screen time or yeah, just sort of more practical ways to apply the parent acronym. So play, authenticity, reframing, empathy. And so basically I wrote a book about it's an age breakdown, so it's by age,
Hmm.
and it's sort of like yeah, practical ways to apply this philosophy, like chores, going shopping, um, cooking, eating, all the routines, morning, evening, night, and then fun is like nature, screen time, special days, baking, etc. So it's like more of a practical application. And that's one of the examples I just gave you. So like in the afternoon routines, I'm sharing sort of some of the recommendations on how you can be a better invisible classmate.
Yeah.
Homework, all these kinds of things, like all these just like the most normal things that you struggle with.
Hmm.
It's giving like a more practical guide.
Okay. When is it going to be released?
April 24th. So you can pre-order it now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll make sure I'm going to pre-order it so I can check that one out. Uh, Obviously, we have covered so much today, Jessica, different lessons, different approaches. If a listener happens to buy your book or happens to be listening to this conversation, from all the lessons that are in your book or all the ideas that you present, what could be something that they could get started on, that they could start with? Obviously, there's so much that maybe they could get a little bit overwhelmed, but what could be that one thing that I'm going to start this today that they could start?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think it's always starting with what are your default settings? So this is my thing. I always say, what are your default settings as a parent? What are you programmed to do? And you know that from your parents and from your culture. Like, it's hard to know what your culture is programmed into you, but most of us have an idea of how we were parented. Then I would say choose two things so that you don't overwhelm yourself. Choose 2 things that you would like to change, that you maybe would have liked to have changed from your own upbringing, and try to work on those. And I think, it's obviously I suggest reading reading my book and looking into this, because I think that when you're open to seeing other ways, I'm not saying that this is the right way. I think there's a lot of right ways. I just think that the fact that for 40 years in a row, you have happiness, voted happiest country in the world, I am convinced that even if you take one thing, whether that's play, whether that's respect-based parenting, whether that's Hygge, anything, I think if you take even one thing and it makes you consider doing it differently, I think it will have an effect on your family life, a positive effect.
Beautiful. Jessica Alexander, everybody. Jessica, thank you so much for being on the show today. Where can people find your work?
So you can find me at thedanishway.com or raisingdigitalcitizens.com. And then on Instagram, I'm Jessica Joelle Alexander. I know it's a long name, so maybe you can link all these things in the show notes.
Description. Yes, absolutely. I will. Jessica, once again, thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everybody.